The metallic scratching sound echoed faintly through the overwhelming darkness of the silent house. The digital clock on my bedside table glared an intimidating 2:00 in the morning. My private study should have been locked tight. My beloved wife Margaret had passed away 3 years earlier, and that specific room still held everything that belonged to her. Her diaries, her architectural blueprints, and the heavy steel lockbox containing the comprehensive inheritance documents. It was sacred ground, but tonight someone had used a stolen duplicate key to break into my fortress. The original key was still resting safely inside my heavy wool jacket pocket. Whoever this intruder was, they had been preparing for this infiltration quietly for a long time. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember this vital lesson. The individuals in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can begin the story, and do not forget to hit subscribe. You are going to love how this one ends. I am Arthur Vance. I spent 35 years working as a senior investigative detective, specializing in complex fraud and asset recovery. My entire career was built on reading the microscopic cracks in a person's facade. I moved lightly across the cold wooden floor. The familiar creaks of the floorboards had long ago been eliminated because I walked close to the load-bearing walls. One advantage of being a seasoned investigator is knowing every single inch of the environment you inhabit. I stopped just outside the heavy oak door of my study. I cracked the door open a fraction of an inch. The pale blue glow from a smartphone screen illuminated the intruder's face in the darkness. It was Isabella, my sweet, polite daughter-in-law, the woman who claimed she did not care about money, the woman who insisted love was the only currency that mattered. Yet at that precise moment, her eyes gleamed with a reckless, consuming greed. Her manicured hands hurried through stacks of private blueprints and financial ledgers. She was searching for the primary inheritance provisions meant for my only son, David. I stood in suffocating silence, watching my daughter-in-law rummage through my late wife's legacy with a stolen key inside my own secret room. The profound sense of betrayal and insult shot down my spine like a current of electricity. The family structure I had worked so hard to protect and nurture was being hollowed out from within by a parasite. She was not just searching through paperwork. She was trampling on Margaret's memory. She was putting a literal price tag on this house, a price on my life, and a price on my son's unconditional love. Rage swelled inside my chest, threatening to boil over into a violent confrontation. But I forced myself to stay calm. A structural crack in a wall cannot be repaired by blindly smashing it apart with a sledgehammer. I needed to know how deep this deception went. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I did not storm into the room shouting accusations. I stood there, blending seamlessly into the shadows of the hallway, watching the naked truth unfold before my eyes. Isabella let out a sharp, audible sigh of relief when she finally found the thick blue folder. She raised her smartphone and systematically photographed every single page. Each click of her digital camera felt like a physical hammer, striking the last remaining fragments of my patience. She was making a catastrophic, fatal mistake. She had no idea that the core blueprint of this house and its financial structure had already been fundamentally changed. The elaborate trap designed specifically for her insatiable greed had officially been set in motion. The blue glow from Isabella's phone screen disappeared as she locked the device. Darkness quickly swallowed the office. Once again, she tiptoed out of the room, clutching her phone to her chest like a prized trophy. I stepped deeper into a recessed alcove in the hallway as I watched her silhouette glide past. A distinct chill settled in my chest. Betrayal begins with the smallest, most insignificant cracks in the foundation. I followed her with my eyes until she disappeared up the staircase, and my mind drifted back to a year earlier, to the first day this dangerous woman had entered my family. It was a crisp autumn evening. David had proudly brought his new girlfriend home to meet me. I had prepared a warm, elaborate dinner. I wanted to welcome the woman who might spend the rest of her life with my brilliant, trusting son. But a seasoned detective does not judge a suspect by the glossy paint on the surface. He studies the foundation beneath. From the moment Isabella stepped through the front door, she revealed the predatory instincts of someone who measured financial value. She did not pause to look at the family photographs filled with cherished memories. Instead, her calculating eyes swept across the expensive decorative moldings on the ceiling. She lightly tapped a solid oak column with her fingers, as though she were mentally estimating the thickness of the wealth hiding behind it. My internal discomfort began to grow significantly during that introductory dinner. The moment David stepped away to the kitchen to fetch more water, Isabella's sweet mask slipped. She did not ask about my health. She did not ask about David's childhood. Her first question caught me off guard. She asked about the property taxes in our upscale neighborhood. She wanted to know how much it cost to maintain the sprawling estate. Then, in a casual conversational tone, she began probing into my retirement investments. She wanted to know how many controlling shares I still owned in my former security firm. I sat quietly, studying every small movement, analyzing her micro-expressions. There was no warmth in her eyes. There was no sign of someone in love with my son. There was only the cold, mechanical calculation of a business person evaluating a profitable acquisition. She was assessing my net worth. David returned to the table, wearing his innocent, trusting smile. My son was blinded by infatuation. He could not see the monster sitting across from him. But I could. A deep sense of unease crawled down my spine, because a foundation built on endless greed can never support true happiness. That night, after they left the house, I stood alone on the back balcony for a long time. The autumn wind was biting, but it could not match the cold realization settling in my mind. I knew a devastating storm was moving toward this family. Isabella had not come to become a homemaker or a devoted wife. She had come to become an economic parasite. She wanted to possess everything Margaret and I had spent a lifetime building. What I never anticipated was how quickly her boldness would grow, and how ruthless her tactics would become. The probing questions at dinner had evolved into something far worse. And now she had been standing inside my office with a stolen key. After Isabella returned to her guest bedroom, I walked back into my office. I approached the heavy desk and opened the hidden drawer beneath it. The thick blue folder she had just photographed was nothing more than bait. She believed she had finally uncovered the most guarded secrets of this family's wealth. But she had no idea that the moment she pressed the shutter button for her final photograph, she had personally signed her own eviction order. I had anticipated her intrusion. 2 weeks prior, I had replaced the legitimate trust documents with legally binding, complex dummy files designed specifically to expose a fraudster. I lowered myself into the worn leather chair and ran my fingers across the smooth wooden surface of the desk. This room had once been filled with Margaret's laughter. Margaret had been a gentle woman, but her protective instincts regarding our family were as precise as a compass. 15 years earlier, when a cruel disease first began to consume her body, she had taken my hand. She looked directly into my eyes and spoke words that remained carved into my memory. She told me that the greatest asset I would ever possess was not the wealth I had accumulated, but David's safety. My grief for Margaret mixed dangerously with my anger toward Isabella, creating a storm inside me. I could not allow my wife's legacy to fall into the hands of a predator. I spent the next 48 hours reviewing old case files from my investigative career, looking for established patterns of matrimonial fraud. Predators like Isabella operate from a standard playbook. They isolate the target, inflate their own perceived value, manufacture artificial emergencies to test compliance, and systematically drain financial resources while promising future stability. David was a textbook victim. He possessed an open heart, a substantial trust fund, and a demanding career that left him too exhausted to question her fabricated crises. She had weaponized his inherent goodness. She was systematically eroding his confidence, replacing his independent thoughts with her own manufactured narrative, ensuring he felt dependent on her approval. I recognized the subtle signs of emotional coercion in every interaction they shared. The way he hesitated before speaking, seeking her subtle nod of permission. The way he apologized for conflicts she had intentionally engineered. Watching my strong, capable son shrink into a shadow of himself fueled a cold, burning determination within my soul. I was not just protecting an inheritance. I was launching a rescue mission to save his life. After that initial dinner, when I first saw through Isabella's true nature, I knew I could not sit back and do nothing. A seasoned detective designs a backup support system capable of withstanding the strongest shocks. I decided to build an impenetrable legal fortress to protect my son. Over the following week, I worked closely with our family attorney. Together, we established an irrevocable trust and an airtight prenuptial agreement. Many people would have called me paranoid. Others would have said I was interfering with my son's happiness. But decades investigating high-level fraud had taught me a painful lesson. Kindness without steel boundaries is weakness waiting to be exploited. I was willing to play the role of the controlling father if it meant David would remain protected. The prenuptial agreement was designed like a bulletproof shield. It separated my family's assets from their marriage. If the relationship ever collapsed, Isabella would not receive a single dollar from the trust or this estate. I knew David would object if he learned about it. My son was too kind, too trusting, so I quietly included a special provision within the documents, a provision that could only take effect with my explicit written approval. I stared at the steel box Isabella had searched through moments earlier. She was probably celebrating in her room right now, convinced she had uncovered every secret surrounding my wealth. She believed those documents were her guaranteed ticket into a world of privilege she had never earned. But she was hopelessly inexperienced, compared to a man who had spent a lifetime calculating risks and reading criminal intentions. My frustration with her had grown exponentially with every passing week of their marriage. David had once been a young man overflowing with energy, carrying a brilliant passion for software development. Now he looked like a wandering ghost. My son was working 60 hours a week at his technology firm just to keep up with the endless, staggering expenses Isabella created. She pressured him. Ethan was exhausted, yet he continued to smile, trying to preserve the illusion of a happy marriage. Meanwhile, Isabella spent her days feeding an extravagant lifestyle online. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, endless purchases charged directly to David's credit cards. She treated my son like an inexhaustible printing press for money. My patience finally reached its breaking point when I uncovered the method she used to acquire my keys. Through the discreet security cameras I had installed, I watched her corner the elderly handyman who maintained the estate. She used her manipulative charm to distract him, slipping his master key ring from his cart just long enough to create a wax impression. But the definitive proof of her ultimate betrayal came 3 days later. I had installed a covert audio recording device near the back patio where she often took private calls. As I reviewed the tapes, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. She was not speaking to a friend or a sponsor. She was speaking to a man she affectionately called her fiancé. Her actual fiancé, the man she had been engaged to long before she ever met David. She laughed coldly into the receiver, bragging about how easily she was manipulating my son, and how the final payout from the fake inheritance documents would fund their new life together in Europe. She was running a long-term con and David was the mark. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. The entire structure of their marriage was not merely a tragic mistake. It was the meticulous blueprint of a coordinated financial scam. She had used her rehearsed affection to trap a decent man, transforming his love into an endless banquet for her greed and the greed of her hidden accomplice. The anger tightening in my throat was nearly overwhelming. If you were in my position, watching a stranger quietly measure the value of everything you had built while plotting with another man, what would you do? Would you confront them immediately, or would you prepare for war in absolute silence? Leave a comment with the number 2 if you would fight quietly, or a 3 if you are undecided. I chose to fight quietly. An investigator never tears down a rotten support column before erecting the scaffolding needed to hold the rest of the structure together. I did not call David immediately to criticize him. I did not rush to confront Isabella. I needed to act with absolute precision. I pulled out my secure phone and transmitted a text message to David containing our family's secret distress code, a specific alphanumeric sequence we had established years ago to indicate a severe, non-negotiable emergency. It was designed to summon him immediately without raising any suspicion from anyone around him. David arrived at my estate less than an hour later, his face pale with concern. We sat in my secure study. I did not waste time with gentle introductions. I placed the audio recording device on the desk and pressed play. David sat frozen as he listened to his wife's cruel laughter. He heard her mock his exhausting work schedule, and he heard her affectionately discussing their stolen future with her secret fiancé. The profound heartbreak that washed over my son's face was agonizing to witness. The naive young man, blinded by devotion, shattered right before my eyes. In his place, a slow, cold realization began to take hold. David wiped his eyes, his expression hardening into something resembling my own resolve. The cleansing had begun. We spent the remainder of the night preparing our counteroffensive. We gathered the financial records, the surveillance footage, and the audio files, organizing them into a devastating chronological timeline. We knew Isabella would strike soon, emboldened by the fake documents she had photographed. We just did not expect her to launch her attack the next morning. The sun had barely risen when Isabella stormed into the grand living room of the estate, her expensive perfume preceding her like a warning siren. David was sitting on the sofa, his posture deliberately relaxed, masking the intense anticipation brewing beneath the surface. The moment Isabella saw me enter the room, she initiated her grand performance. Without hesitation, she launched into the role of the aggrieved victim. She turned toward David, tears already forming in her eyes, and pointed an accusing finger directly at me. Her voice trembled with manufactured outrage. She accused me of being a tyrant, a controlling father, a selfish old man obsessed with manipulating his son's life. She pulled out her phone, waving the digital photographs of the fake documents in the air, claiming I had secretly created trusts and legal barriers specifically to exclude her from the family. She insisted I had never respected her, never accepted her, never treated her as one of us. Every single sentence was crafted to transform me into a villain in my son's eyes. The sheer shamelessness of her performance was astounding. But I remained still, my back straight, my expression an unreadable mask, like a load-bearing column designed to withstand an earthquake. I watched as she boldly demanded rights to property she had never helped build. She insisted David force me to transfer part of the ownership of the house Margaret and I had cherished for decades. She called it her legal entitlement, her necessary reward for sacrificing so much for this family. The louder she shouted, the more her ugly greed revealed itself. Across the room, David looked up. He did not look confused or conflicted. He looked exhausted by her lies. Seeing his silence, Isabella misinterpreted it as hesitation. She became even bolder. She declared that if I refused to surrender control of the estate, she would immediately file for divorce, threatening lawsuits, defamation claims, and public accusations. She believed the photographs she had stolen gave her ultimate leverage. She believed she held the winning hand. I looked directly into her eyes and said nothing. The heavy silence changed everything. Her voice weakened, the shouting slowed, then stopped. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across her face. The sprawling living room fell into a chilling silence. Slowly, I placed a heavy leather envelope onto the glass coffee table. My gaze never left hers. Then I smiled, a cold, deliberate smile, because it was finally time for Isabella to discover the true structure of the trap she had blindly stepped into. I unfastened the heavy leather envelope with deliberate, agonizing slowness. Inside were several crisp, original documents. I removed the first one, a legitimate legal filing bearing the official, raised seal of the state's most respected financial law firm. Without saying a single word, I slid it across the glass table toward her. Isabella snatched it up immediately, her eyes scanning the page with arrogant expectation. Her confidence lasted for less than 3 seconds. I watched her eyes move across the introductory paragraphs, and then stop dead at the figure printed in bold type. The color drained from her face as if a valve had been opened. Her mouth fell slightly open. The arrogance vanished, the manufactured anger vanished, even the fake tears vanished. All that remained was pure, unadulterated terror. Because the number she was staring at was not the value of the estate she hoped to claim. It was the specific amount she had unknowingly made herself liable for, under the fraud and unlawful access provisions, triggered by the dummy documents she had stolen. And for the first time since entering my family, Isabella realized she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The photographs, she thought, were her greatest weapon, had just become the strongest foundational evidence against her. The moment I spoke the number out loud, $2.5 million, the real monster hiding inside Isabella finally revealed itself. The luxurious living room felt as suffocating as a sealed vault. I pointed to the legal document resting on the table. That figure represented the true value of the trust Margaret and I had established for David, a fortune large enough to provide unparalleled comfort and security for the rest of his life. Isabella's eyes widened. A raw animalistic hunger flashed across her face. For a brief moment, pure greed overwhelmed every attempt at self-control. But the triumphant smile forming on her lips never had a chance to bloom. I turned the page. Everything changed. The next document was the actual, binding prenuptial agreement. The legal fortress I had spent years designing. I looked directly at Isabella as the remaining color drained from her cheeks. Then I began explaining the provisions, one by one. Every asset, every account, every dollar held within the trust. All of it belonged to David. The trust was protected under strict, unyielding legal safeguards. It remained separate from the marriage, and in the event of a divorce, none of it could ever become marital property. Not a single dollar, not a single cent. Isabella lunged forward and grabbed the documents. She flipped through the pages. Her hands shook so that the edges of the thick paper began to tear. The transformation was horrifying to witness. The helpless, marginalized victim she had pretended to be vanished. In its place stood someone consumed by panic, consumed by the realization that everything she believed she was entitled to was slipping away. Then, the ultimate understanding struck her. The steel box she had broken into had been a trap. The photographs she had stolen were worthless. Her prized weapon had become useless. The shock quickly mutated into pure rage. Isabella threw the documents onto the floor. The sound echoed harshly through the living room. Then she began screaming. She turned toward David, demanding his support, pleading for him to defend her against my supposed cruelty. She expected him to fold, to coddle her, to prioritize her feelings over the harsh truth, just as he had. But David remained seated. He did not flinch. He did not offer a comforting word. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He connected it to the living room's wireless audio system with a few taps. Then he pressed play. The crystal-clear audio recording of Isabella, speaking with her secret fiancé, filled the massive room. Her own voice, dripping with contempt, bragging about the inheritance scam, echoed off the walls. The recording laid bare every single lie, every manipulation, every calculated move she had made since the day they met. The audio stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella was left speechless. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but her brain could not formulate a single plausible lie to counter the overwhelming evidence. The crafted world she had built on a foundation of deception had just been annihilated. She backed away from the coffee table, her eyes darting toward the front door, realizing she had nowhere left to run. Her influencer career, her comfortable lifestyle, her grand scheme, all of it was gone. Desperation is a dangerous catalyst. Seeing her entire deceptive empire collapsing around her, Isabella reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so she could barely unlock the screen. She dialed a number and practically screamed into the receiver, demanding that he come to the estate immediately. She was calling her secret fiancé, the co-architect of her massive scam. She genuinely believed that he could somehow salvage the situation, or at least intimidate us into a financial settlement. We waited in the tense, suffocating silence of the living room. Less than 15 minutes later, a heavy, aggressive knock rattled the front door. Without waiting for an invitation, the heavy oak door swung open, and a tall, arrogant-looking man marched inside. He wore a flashy suit and carried himself with the unwarranted confidence of a seasoned con artist who believed he was the smartest person in any room. He looked at me with open disdain, expecting to find a frail, easily intimidated old man and a heartbroken, submissive husband. He stepped directly into the center of the living room, wrapping a protective arm around the trembling Isabella. He looked at David and sneered, launching into a rehearsed speech about how Isabella deserved a massive financial settlement for enduring our family. He demanded half the value of the estate, threatening to drag our names through the mud in a messy public divorce trial if we refused to pay up. His arrogance was nauseating. He paced around the room like he owned the property, running his hands over the antique furniture, a predatory smirk plastered across his face. He boasted about how easy it had been to string David along, laughing at my son's long working hours and naive devotion. He detailed their grand plans, describing the lavish European lifestyle they intended to finance using my family's accumulated wealth. He viewed us not as human beings, but as a temporary, inconvenient obstacle, standing between him and a massive payday. His supreme overconfidence blinded him to the reality of the situation. He had spent his entire life bullying weaker targets, manipulating trusting victims, and running away before the consequences could catch up to him. He assumed today would be another effortless victory in a long line of successful cons. He could not comprehend that he had just walked into an inescapable trap designed by a man who had spent 35 years hunting parasites exactly like him. David finally stood up. He did not look like the exhausted, defeated man who had been drained of his finances and energy for the past year. He looked like my son. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, stopping just a few feet away from the con artist. The fiancé chuckled condescendingly and took a step forward, attempting to shove David backward to establish physical dominance. It was a severe miscalculation. David effortlessly sidestepped the aggressive shove. Planting his feet on the hardwood floor, he pivoted his hips and punched the arrogant man squarely in the jaw with devastating, unexpected force. The sickening crack echoed through the room as the fiancé's eyes rolled backward. He collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, neutralized, groaning in pathetic agony. Isabella screamed in horror, dropping to her knees beside him. The tough, confident facade they had both projected was destroyed. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed the local police precinct. I requested a patrol unit for trespassing, attempted extortion, and suspected financial fraud, noting that I had extensive audio and physical evidence ready for the authorities. When the police arrived, they did not find a glamorous socialite and a wealthy businessman. They found two defeated scammers sitting on a sofa, facing serious felony charges. As Isabella was escorted out of the house in handcuffs, she did not look back. The performance was officially over, the audience had departed, and the stage was being dismantled. 2 years passed quickly after the storm named Isabella. The old house Margaret and I had built was once again filled with light, warmth, and genuine laughter. The suffocating tension had been purged. David was no longer a wandering ghost. He had reclaimed his brilliant career, and, more importantly, he had reclaimed his spirit. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, David sat in the living room. Beside him was Clara, a young woman whose bright smile seemed to illuminate every corner of the house. Unlike Isabella, Clara never stared at the expensive crown molding on the ceiling to estimate its market value. Instead, she spent her time studying the old family photographs displayed throughout the hallways. She often asked about Margaret, not out of calculating curiosity about an inheritance, but out of genuine deep respect. She wanted to know about Margaret's architectural blueprints, her kindness, her dreams, and the history behind the photographs. I stood quietly in the kitchen doorway and watched them together. For the first time in many years, I felt a profound, absolute peace. A seasoned investigator understands that once a rotten, compromised structure has been removed, a solid foundation becomes available for something much stronger to be built in its place. Clara was that new foundation. She loved David for who he was, not for the $2.5 million in the trust, not for the sprawling estate, for the man himself. And that made all the difference in the world. As I look back on everything that transpired, there is one critical lesson I want to leave with you. Throughout your life, you will encounter people who view your kindness as a vulnerability than a virtue. They wear polished smiles, they say all the right words, but beneath the surface lies an endless, consuming hunger for what belongs to someone else. The hardest truth I learned is this: good people cannot be protected by goodness alone. Sometimes kindness requires boundaries, Sometimes compassion requires strength, sometimes love requires unbreakable rules. Build those protective boundaries before you ever need them. Protect the people you care about. Protect your family. Protect your future. Because kindness without strength often becomes an open invitation to exploitation. In the end, our story reached a satisfying conclusion. Justice prevailed, truth survived, and the values Margaret spent her entire life defending remained intact. Thank you for spending this time with Dad's real-life revenge. Remember this, as you move through your own journey, storms will come. People will disappoint you, foundations will be tested. But if your principles are strong enough, your life can withstand even the fiercest winds. And sometimes, after the storm has finally passed, the view becomes more beautiful than you ever imagined.